Panther loomed out of the fog at 75 yards. That is close enough to see the commander's face. On paper, this was the best tank on the field near Arracourt in September of 1944. Its 75mm main gun could destroy an American Sherman well before the Sherman could see it. In good weather, on open ground, this fight is not close. But the American tank destroyer that caught it that morning was sitting in a dip in the ground, and it fired first into the Panther's flank from a range where the German gun's reach meant nothing. Over 11 days around Arracourt, the German 5th Panzer Army sent in 262 tanks and assault guns. 62 were still running at the end. The Americans, who did most of the fighting, lost 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The Panther outranged everything the Americans brought. It lost anyway, and badly. The reason had nothing to do with a better American gun. Start with the machine, because it deserves the credit. The Panther carried a long 75mm gun that fired an armor-piercing shell at roughly 3,000 feet per second. That is fast. That flat, fast shell held its punch out past a mile. The Panther crew on a ridge could knock out a Sherman at 2,000 yards and never take a hit back. The American Sherman carried a stubby 75mm gun. It could not punch through the front of a Panther at any sensible range. The newer American 76mm gun, the one on the M18 Hellcat, was better. It still could not beat the Panther's frontal armor head. Every honest American tanker at Arracourt knew it. If a Panther saw you first on open ground, you were in trouble. So the whole American answer was to make sure the Panther did not see you first. And at Arracourt, the ground and the weather did most of that work for free. The order to attack came down through General Hermann Bolk, who ran Army Group G, to General Hasso von Manteuffel and his 5th Panzer Army. Facing them was the 4th Armored Division under General John Wood, a formation that had been driving hard across France for weeks and knew its business. The German plan was to hit it with 2 fresh brigades at once and cut off the American spearhead. The German force looked strong on the order sheet. On the 19th of September, Manteuffel ordered 2 fresh formations, Panzer Brigade 111 and Panzer Brigade 113, to drive on Arracourt from 2 directions. These brigades were new. Each was built around a battalion of Panthers and a battalion of Panzer IVs, the Panthers straight from the factory. On the sheet, that is a lot of the best tank in the theater, pointed at 1 American division. The sheet was lying. These brigades were raised in August, weeks before the battle. Their crews had almost no combat behind them. By the German army's own account, they had about 2 weeks of training. 2 weeks. Many of the drivers could not read a map properly. The fuel shortage that was strangling the whole German army in the West had cut their training hours to almost nothing. So the crews had never really practiced fighting as a group. They could drive a Panther. They could load it and fire it. Moving 100 tanks together across strange country in fog under artillery was something they had never done. These were frightened, half-trained men in the best tank in the world, and it was not going to be enough. There is a smaller detail that tells the whole story. The brigades were short of armored half-tracks, so most of the 4,800 men riding with the tanks went to war in trucks. Trucks stay on roads. That meant the infantry that was supposed to protect the Panthers could not follow them off the roads and into the fields where the fighting happened. The best tank in France was going into battle half blind and nearly alone. Now the ground it had to cross. This corner of Lorraine is low-rolling farmland cut by small ridges and villages like Bézange-la-Petite and Lézé. A Panther gunner needs a long, clear line of sight to use his range. This ground does not give him one. And the men driving those Panthers had never scouted it. They were pushing across country they did not know, toward an enemy they could not see. On the morning of the 19th, the fog came in thick. This is the hinge of the whole battle. The official United States Army history of the campaign says, the fog protected the German armor from air attack, permitted the American tanks to fight at close quarters where the longer range of the Panther tank gun had no advantage. Read that through a gunner's eyes. The Panther's one great edge was reached. Fog closes, reach down to a couple of 100 yards. Sometimes less. Everything the Panther was best at, the fog switched off. There is a reason the side shot mattered so much, and it is built into the tank. The front of a Panther was about 3 inches of steel laid back at a steep slope, which turned an incoming shell and made the plate act even thicker. Almost nothing the Americans had could get through it from straight ahead. The side of the hull was a different tank. Down low it was around 1.5 inches of nearly upright plate, less than half the frontal protection, and set at an angle that helped a shell bite instead of glance. Hit a Panther in the front and you scarred the paint. The same tank in the side from a couple of 100 yards and you went through. Every American at Arracourt was hunting for that side shot, and the fog was handing it to them. The Americans had trained for exactly this. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion drove the M18 Hellcat, an open-topped, thin-skinned vehicle that could not survive a straight fight with a Panther. What it could do was move. The Hellcat could hit 55 miles per hour on a road, the fastest tracked vehicle of the war. American tank destroyer doctrine was built on that speed. Do not trade shots with the heavy tank. Get to its side, where the armor is thin, and fire before it can turn. That is precisely what happened. Near Bézange-la-Petite that morning, a Hellcat platoon under Captain William Dwight was waiting when the Panthers of Brigade 113 came on through the murk. A Panther appeared at about 75 yards. From that range, from the side, the American 76mm gun went straight through. 3 of Dwight's 4 tank destroyers were lost in the fight. Before they destroyed 7 German tanks. Trade 3 open-topped vehicles for 7 Panthers, and you have won the morning. A few miles off, Captain Richard Lamison was doing the same math with Shermans. He ran 4 tanks up onto a ridge west of Bézange-la-Petite and got them set about 3 minutes before 8 Panthers rolled into view. 3 minutes. His crews destroyed 4 of the German tanks before a single one fired back. Then Lamasson pulled his tanks back over the crest, out of sight, moved south a short way, came up again in a new spot, and finished off the rest. Same tank the Americans supposedly could not beat. He beat 8 of them and did not lose one because he saw them first and hit them in the flank. It kept happening across the plateau. Near Arracourt, another Hellcat platoon from the same battalion worked its way onto the flank of a German column and destroyed 8 more Panthers in one action. Add up the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion's whole fight around Arracourt, and the count is lopsided. Something close to 40 German tanks destroyed against 4 Hellcats lost. 4 thin, open-topped vehicles for 40 Panthers. That is not a better gun doing the work. That is what speed and cover buy you. The first shot, every time, before the Panther knew where to look. Look at what decided both of those fights. Not the gun. In both, the German gun could outshoot the American gun by a wide margin, and in both it never got the chance, because the American fired first from a range and an angle the German crew never saw coming. A gun built to kill at 2,000 yards killed nothing at 75. All that reach was just weight. The Panther hauled onto the field for nothing. The next day, the 20th, the fog thinned and the fight opened up a little. Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, pushed his Shermans forward around Lizay and traded blows with the Panzers at longer range, losing roughly a dozen tanks against a dozen German. Even then the Germans got no comfort, because when the sky cleared, the fighter bombers of the 19th Tactical Air Command came down on the German columns, and American artillery was ranged across the whole plateau. A green crew in a strange country, low on fuel, now had aircraft overhead and shells landing among them. The fuel state meant a Panther that broke down or ran dry was often simply left. Not knocked out. Abandoned. The crew walked away from the best tank on the field. There was nothing to move it and nothing to fill it. Imagine the frustration of that. You have the finest armor in France, and you leave it standing in a wet field because the fuel truck never came. By the end of the month, the arithmetic was brutal and one-sided. Of 262 German armored vehicles committed near Arracourt, only 62 were still fit to fight. The regional loss ran to over 100 Panthers alone. Panzer Brigade 111 was destroyed as a unit. From 90 tanks and about 2,500 men, it came out with 7 tanks and 80 men. The brigade ceased to exist. Against all of that, the American Combat Command that carried the load lost 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers. The side with the worst tank walked off the field, and the side with the better tank left most of its Panthers standing dead in the fields of Lorraine. Colonel Bruce Clark, who ran the American defense, had done nothing clever with technology because he had no technology that could match a Panther. What he had was crews who knew the ground. Every tank carried a radio. They had trained together for months, and they understood one simple rule. Never let the Panther fight the fight it was built for. The fog handed him the close range. The fuel shortage and the green German crews handed him enemies who could not adapt. He supplied the rest. So here is the honest verdict on Arracourt. The Panther was the better tank, and it was not close. Put those two forces at 2,000 yards on a clear day over open ground the crews knew, and the Americans take a beating. But that fight never happened. Instead, the Panther fought at 75 yards, in fog, on ground its crews had never seen, low on fuel, with its infantry stuck back on the roads in trucks. Every one of those things was boring. None of them is a gun. Together they took the best tank in France apart. That is the thing the spec sheet can never tell you. A tank does not fight on paper, at the range that flatters it, on ground of its choosing. It fights where it is, in the weather it gets, with the crew it has and the fuel in its tank. Arracourt is the proof. The Panther kept every advantage it had on the 19th of September. It just never got to a range where a single one of them counted. Reach is only reach if the fog lets you use it.